Hello, everybody. I'm Johnny Sain with Round the Fire on EarthX TV, and I'm here with guest Ryan Bussey. Ryan is a lifelong firearms industry vet. 25 years, is that right, Ryan?
Yep.
Okay. He's also a hunter and angler, of course, and he's been a conservationist and environmentalist for 25 years or longer.
Since I can remember. I don't know how long that is.
Okay. Our other guest is Rob Sisson. Rob is a former head of Conserve America, and he's current commissioner of the International Joint Commission. He's also a hunter and angler, lifetime conservationist.
Yes, sir, Johnny.
Would you call yourself an environmentalist?
I would.
Would you? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, sometimes people get,
Well, Conserve America was originally called Republicans for Environmental Protection.
Okay.
So the E word was there for a long time.
All right. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great, Johnny. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Good to be here.
Both of them are in Montana, where I'm here in Arkansas, sweating out 93 degrees in September. I think they had snow last night. Got down to the 20s, starting to feel like fall out there.
It was 27 here this morning, and I drove through snow for my bird camp last night. So yeah.
I said I'll be swatting mosquitoes out here on the patio. We don't see temperatures like that until January, maybe December. We'll get a few in November, but mostly December and January. Today we're going to talk about hunters and anglers, and we're going to ask the question to Rob and Ryan and get their responses. Can you be a hunter and angler and not be a conservationist or environmentalist? Or healthy wildlife populations and fish populations are tied to healthy habitat. And so it seems like there's no way you can get around not protecting this, this essential ingredient to be a hunter and angler. So first I'd like to start off with Rob. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I wish you'd ask the question the other way around. Can you be a conservationist and a hunter and angler? Because that makes it kind of an easier question to answer. But as you asked it, there's a lot of permutations of hunters and anglers. There's a whole spectrum. There's people that are just simply takers. They're out in the woods or out in the field just to take. They're not there to give back, even though they inadvertently do through license fees and taxes on sporting equipment that they might buy.
You can be a hunter in this country and not be a conservationist or an environmentalist. I don't think you can be a moral one, but the work that people have done to restore the resources, the wildlife and resources in this country has afforded us a time of plenty, to be honest with you. And the folks that Rob describes, there are many people that can just wander around in the work that people have done and the past generations have done and just be a taker. I don't think that makes you a moral person, and frankly, just because you pay an involuntary tax, it's a voluntary tax for manufacturers, but you pay an involuntary tax when you purchase firearms or ammunition, and you call yourself a conservationist. I don't think that's sufficient, and neither would the past generations. Certainly, our founding fathers of conservation, like Leupold or Roosevelt, would consider that sufficient. I think being a conservationist requires a higher level of thought and a higher level of commitment than just involuntary taking.
I think you brought up a good point there, and what you alluded to was the Pittman-Robertson tax, which is a tax on outdoor equipment, or hunting and fishing equipment, that goes directly to fund wildlife conservation. And, and you two, I know, have seen it as I have, that a lot of hunters, I don't want to say hide behind that, but they carry that around as a banner that we're paying these taxes because we're buying these guns and buying fishing equipment. And it's not like they're voluntarily, I thought you mentioned that. I don't remember if you said it was voluntary or involuntarily.
Well, it's actually written into law as a voluntary tax. No manufacturer considers it voluntary at this point. It is collected like a tax. So, but consumers do not consider it voluntary. I mean, nobody goes to the store and says, "Oh gosh, would you like to contribute an extra 9.5% on the box of ammunition so that you can save the wildlife down the street?" No, that's not a conscious decision that's being made. And I think environmentalism and conservationism requires a conscious decision, a commitment from people who want to do the right thing for the resource.
So it requires some sense of sacrifice, giving back.
Well, Johnny, you just mentioned something that I think's really important and something I've bumped my head up against for many years in the business or the profession of conservation. And that's a lot of hunters and anglers, a lot of farmers will say, well, we're the original conservationists and hide behind that. And we can come up with a lot of examples where that's true, but we can come up with a lot of examples where it wasn't true. I think there are people who absolutely are not conservationists or environmentalists. There are people who are unconsciously good conservationists. I think like both of my grandfathers teaching me to fish or taking me fishing and throwing back breeding aged fish so they could reproduce and add to the sport or add to the fishery. And just the little kind of unwritten rules of sporting ethic and hunting and fishing that we pass on from one generation to another. And then there are the conscious ones like Ryan and you and me and others who every day when we wake up, we think, how can we pass what we've experienced on to future generations?
So, I don't think we should expect all hunters to be our definition of conservationists. I think it's unreasonable to expect that. It certainly was not that way 115 years ago in kind of the modern era, kind of the rebirth of conservation. There were people that did more than others, and there were people that had time or more commitment or were just more involved in it. And that's the way it will always be. But for people to hide behind, for people to claim that they are something or want to have the credit for something when there's not a conscious decision being made, when it's really an involuntary action, I don't know if that quite cuts the mustard.
So would you say that like you said, not everyone is expected to do this? Almost, if you were going to be an active conservationist or environmentalist and a hunter, it's a form of activism, really. And not everyone is cut out to be an activist.
I think it absolutely is a form of activism. And if it's not, even in small actions, I grew up on a farm, and it required personal activism. It didn't require activism in the way we think of protesting in the streets, but it required activism from my grandfather and my father to do things like enroll land in conservation reserve program, or leave field edges for pheasants and quail, or not shoot every deer that walked onto the place to eat hay, or it's a quiet kind of personal activism too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And Rob touched on that. We were talking about, releasing fish, catch and release angling, being selective on your harvest when you're hunting. And I've heard that, around here, quail hunting in the South used to be almost a religion. Of course, quail populations have been decimated and they're coming back with habitat restoration. But one of the mantras that I heard from the old quail hunters is they never shot a covey out. They would, if they found a covey of 15 birds, they would take 5 or 6 of those birds and they would move on to another covey, and they wouldn't even visit it again that year. So it was kind of a passive activism. And it was a sense of stewardship without, again, they didn't need to fly that banner around and tell everybody this is what we're doing. It was just part of being a hunter and angler. You didn't do that. You didn't take more than you needed. Do you think that there has been a shift in as far as percentages of people that think that way versus more people that just come out there to take?
I think this is like a lot of areas in our society, Johnny. I'm actually heartened by a lot of people that I know, a lot of young people in the sport that I know, who are more ardent conservationists maybe than even a past generation. So I think on one hand, you see that, and on the other hand, I'm very dismayed at some of the commercialized taking, social media, kill them all, let God sort them out kind of stuff that we see. And isn't that sort of what we deal with in society now? That the radical middle is kind of gone, and you have one side or the other that tends to be more influential on the edges. And of course, I side with the edge, who's a more ardent conservationist, but I see both. I don't know what Rob sees, but I see both instances.
Yeah, no, I see both. And I think a lot of people are surprised when I talk to them about my old hometown of or home county in Southwest Michigan, fairly industrialized. A lot of people there work in the RV industry in Northern Indiana. But we did kind of an unofficial poll, a decade ago or so, and about 60% of the population of that county lives a subsistence form, a lifestyle. They're fishing or hunting to put protein on their table. And I think we run in, there's a spectrum of people who they're gonna put food on the table no matter what it takes to get it done. And there are going to be others that maybe are sporting or conservation minded, or have the luxury of not having to go out and procure food in the woods or on the lakes, who won't take some of those steps. So and I suspect that's probably true in a lot of areas in this country. And it's something that, the national media, the coastal leaders don't know about so much of this, I guess the people that live in flyover country, that there is still this subsistence hunting culture that can drive some of the bad things that we hear about in our among our sporting brethren.
Where I live in rural Arkansas, it's that same mentality still prevails. People take from the land because lots of times because they do need to, and sometimes it's just tradition. This is how great grandpa and grandpa did it, and dad did it. And I know a few people that won't eat any meat bought from a grocery store. They have to get it themselves, and that may mean some agriculture, and oftentimes though that means deer and turkeys, and sometimes that even goes beyond what the law allows. But okay, besides the differences in you could even probably classify that as a difference in why people hunt. But talking about being a conservationist environmentalist as a hunter, this where we are today in 2020, we talked about, I'm sitting out here in September and it's 94 degrees. I don't know if y'all can see the sweat beads on my forehead and the sweat dripping down my nose, but it feels like July here. I know out west it's been crazy. What were the temperatures just last week in Montana and places in Montana? Wouldn't it get up in the 90s?
Yeah, I was hunting birds in high plains, high elevation, 4,500 feet. It was 93 on it was 93 on Saturday.
And then you got snow today.
Yep.
So some crazy weather. So according to climate scientists, we're experiencing climate change. It's caused by industrial activities, too much carbon. That's probably, one of the bigger threats, not only an existential threat for humans, but to hunters and anglers, is it changes habitat. Is it changes seasonal patterns of animal behavior. How can hunters and anglers address this threat? That along with, water issues, that along with public lands issues. What's the best way for hunters and anglers to meet these head on and influence change in policy?
You know what? It's become a difficult, touchy, sort of divisive political subject like so much else in our lives. And I think it's sad. But the truth is, science and facts matter. They've always mattered to wildlife conservation and to conservation in general. And I guess the thing that I have found, because I've operated personally in circles and in cadres where there's a lot of doubt, just innate doubt. Usually it's politically based doubt about climate science or climate change, or about what the motivations of climate scientists are. And I think it's important to lay that stuff aside and talk about what could happen to the things that we love. So focus on the things that we agree on. In many of these areas, nobody debates that they want to have wild trout in cold water. Nobody debates that they want to have elk habitat that harbors elk, and nobody debates that they want to have cold winters that help sharp-tails survive parasites. Nobody debates those things. So let's start on what we agree upon. And then I think one of the more daunting things to people is, and Rob's probably heard this, is it's such a big problem. What the hell can we do anyway, right? So why worry about it? Let's just get on to something else. I think focusing on the idea that we created the problem And a problem that you can create, you can uncreate. So we can have impact on this because we already have impact on it. So let's convince people that they can do something in their personal lives to make an impact and to have an impact, and that it doesn't have to upend every single thing you think about the way you exist today. I think that's a good place to start. I don't know what Rob finds, but
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is kind of my mantra during my time at Conserve America was I met a lot of elected Republican officials, primarily at the federal level, a lot at state level across this country. And there are a couple of famous examples of people who've denied climate science, but by and large, the vast majority of people I've spoken to believe the climate science. They'd like to do something about it. But it is, I think Ryan alluded to, it becomes a political issue. Like, gee, can I get reelected, or am I going to lose clout, or am I going to lose campaign funding if I come out of the closet, so to speak, on this? And I think that's where Sportsmen can really play a huge role in, first of all, joining organizations like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, NWF, all the species-oriented organizations that are working on climate, particularly where it concerns habitat. But you know, last week we had an 8-mile long algal bloom in the Gallatin River, which is a cold water stream, essentially rendering it unfishable for a good section of the Blue Ribbon water. Back in southeast Michigan, a few years ago, we had several mild winters that culminated with a particular little flea that likes to gnaw on deer and passes along what is called blue tongue disease. Mm-hmm. And it basically wiped out the deer herd in southwest Michigan for a couple of years. So hunters and anglers see firsthand the impact of climate change. And they can then talk to elected leaders without being, I think a lot of hunters and anglers are old school, flannel wearing. They just want to go do their thing, come back, cook their game, around, and have their family around their hearth. They don't want to rock the boat. But I think reporting what they're seeing and experiencing outdoors to elected officials is a very non-threatening way, very comfortable way for anglers and hunters to get involved and help nudge our elected officials along towards these solutions. And we know what the solutions are, and we know the steps we can take. It's just, it's building the political will. And I think hunters and anglers play a critical role in providing that support behind the scenes for elected officials to make those decisions.
Well, I would agree. I just want to add, Johnny, I think that too often on difficult issues, constituencies like hunters and anglers think, well, I'll wait for Senator X or Representative Y to take the leadership role on this, and they'll stick their neck out there. So here's a little news flash. Elected politicians are not leaders. Almost never are they leaders. Occasionally there's a shining star that actually sticks their neck out, his or her neck out, and leads on something. But in almost every case, in every important change in this country, change has bubbled up from the people who ask the representatives to do something. So if it's important to us, if the shark tail, if the elk, if the trout, if the if blue tongue, if all these, if it's important to us, then we need to ask our elected officials to be leaders on this or to lead with us. And frankly, it comes down to the ballot box. Elected officials respond to the fact of their belief on whether you're going to vote for them again or not. And if we raise this to an issue that we vote on, that's important enough to us to vote on, then there will be action on policy. It's that simple.
And I think hunters and anglers are at the nexus of the political grassroots in this country by virtue of being gun owners and being conservationists and belonging to some of these organizations. They're uniquely positioned to talk to people on both sides of the aisle, politically speaking, and to be appreciated and respected by people on both sides of the aisle. And so I think hunters and anglers, again, one of the key constituencies to make sure the United States or help the United States to become a leader on climate policy.
That's a good point, Robin. That's what I was thinking. Most hunters and anglers tend to lean conservative, and so you would think they would have a lot more. I think they do. They do have a lot more clout than they realize. And I'm often puzzled as to why that's not used as a bludgeon to get things done.
Yeah, I'd like Ryan to weigh in on this because of his background in the firearms industry, but I know that people on the right side of the political spectrum have always taken hunters and anglers for granted because, gee, they're hunters and anglers and they own guns. But a mutual friend of ours, who is a fairly prominent, I would say, outdoor celebrity, told me, hey, Rob, any chance you get to talk to people back in Washington, you tell them that hunters and anglers are no longer a constituency for one political party or the other. We're going to vote for habitat. We're going to vote for climate policy. We're going to vote for public lands.
I think that sadly over the last, say, 15 years, I'm just guessing 15 years. I didn't pick that for any particular reason, but that's what it feels like for me being inside the firearms industry. I think that once kind of guns and the hot button social issues were wrapped up into the single issue voting block, and gun owners kind of got pulled into that. I think that gun owners and hunters and fishermen have kind of been taken advantage of, because they got pushed into voting into a block that doesn't always represent their best interests on conservation and environmental activities. I've had this sense that that's starting to change. I consider a lot of Rob's work to be changing that, to essentially all we're really asking as, Rob and I may come from different political perspectives, but all we're really asking is for our constituency to vote their own self-interest, right? That's it. Like, just vote for the things that are important for you. And you have these outside social media, big moneyed influencers that try to convince people to focus on shiny objects that may be ancillarily important or may even be somewhat important, but they try to have them forget everything else. And too often, the stuff that is forgotten, conservation, environmental activities, clean water policy, clean air policy, that's the stuff that gets pushed to the edge. And it shouldn't get pushed to the edge.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest examples, and Ryan, you were at the center of this, or you were chair of a prominent national hunter and angler organization for quite a while. A couple of years ago, there was a bill introduced into Congress to dispose of some public lands.
Yeah.
And the group that Ryan headed up and a couple other groups organized these camo at the Capitol rallies in Helena and Provo and other capitals in the West. And boy, I'm talking in a New York minute, that legislation was yanked, and hopefully will never be seen again. But we have to be vigilant to make sure that those interests are reiterated and reemphasized with each new class in state capitals and in Washington.
Yeah, and I think we can do that. And that sort of success, that was a Jason Chaffetz bill, former congressman from Utah, who introduced that and who pulled a bill without it ever being heard or voted upon, which is never done ever. So public pressure can be brought, and I see an emerging class of advocates, a lot of them young advocates, which is really exciting. Rob mentioned, I was chair of BHA, and the average age of the BHA member is well south of 42 or 43. It's a very young organization. And those sorts of people have fire in their bellies to do the right thing. And I think we need to encourage and multiply that cohort so that we have more of that kind of advocacy, because frankly, that's the sort of advocacy that changes hearts and minds on other issues of import throughout our lives, whether it was civil rights or whatever it was. When that young, motivated cohort rises up and decides to make their voices heard, things usually get done. So I know it can be done.
Yeah, and another trend that I find just exciting is the number of young women getting into hunting and fishing as well. When I was a kid, both were, it was a man's world, and to see a woman out on the lake fishing or on the river fly fishing or with a shotgun in her hands was so unusual. Now it is, the women, I think, that's the growth industry for the sporting goods manufacturers, because they're coming on strong. They're coming in at a young age, whether it's dads or big brothers, or they're just paying attention to social media. I think women in the outdoors pursuits are going to become the force to reckon with, and a force of nature that will really expedite the things that we care about.
Yeah, so we did, and I completely agree with Rob. It's a fantastic trend, something that we should be pouring every bit of fuel to we can. And it's my belief, and our studies, while I was at BHA, indicate this. Many women, nothing has been better for the growth of women in hunting and fishing than the locavore movement, the local food movement. The majority of women that we see coming to the sport come to it because they want to have hands-on experience with the food that they eat and they feed their families. I mean, and I share that with them. That's a very big passion of mine. So back to our subsistence discussion about how important wildlife is to people and why it's important to people. In this case, wildlife and healthy wildlife populations and the result of conservation are bringing people to hunting and fishing because it's a way to harvest your own food ethically and obviously organically.
Wow, I did not expect the conversation to end up there. But it all ties together, though. It makes sense. So in conclusion on all this, after we've talked about all this, and Rob, he's flipped the question on me, and basically by saying that the default mode of hunters and anglers is conservationists and environmentalists, just because they do involuntarily foot the bill for a large portion of habitat and wildlife conservation. But that's not enough. Both you guys agree on that?
Oh yeah, I think funding is fine. I think a funding source from Pittman Roberts is fine. I mean, it's great. I don't want to see it go away, but that alone, I mean, that's not going to fix climate change. That's not going to keep politicians from doing crazy things with public lands. That's not like that's not going to bring back a healthier CRP program. It takes advocacy to do those things, not just funding.
Yeah, as population grows, the demands on our public lands are going to continue to grow. The number of people out in the field, I guess, hopefully the numbers of sportsmen and sportswomen will grow, but it's going to take active conservation to ensure that there is wildlife, there is habitat for future generations. And so I agree with both of you that to be a conservationist you need to turn it up a notch. It's not enough just to buy a license. It's not enough just to buy some ammunition every now and then. You actually have to do something. I think of an uncle of mine. The thing he did every year was volunteer to cook chicken at a conservation club chicken dinner to raise money. That's kind of the minimum step we should ask from people who want to participate in our sport.
That was a fantastic way to wrap it up, I think. Do either one of you have anything else to add on that?
The only other thing I would add is I think if you love these things, if you love the places that you go, if you love the animals that you hunt, if you love the habitats that you find them in, you ought to at least love them enough to vote for them. To not let these things fall way down on your list of motivators for your voting activity. I agree. You should volunteer and cook chicken at a local banquet. You should donate to your local habitat or your local species organization. But do what you do with other important things in your life. Vote for it. Just vote for it.
All right. I think that's going to wrap up this episode of Around the Fire. I want to thank you, Rob and Ryan, for joining us here. But okay, next time I'm in Montana, all three of us have to get together and beers are on Ryan.
Sounds good.
Sounds really good to me.
All right. Thank y'all. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.